I guess that leads really to a corollary, which is there's so much need. I mean, David, how do you have to pick and choose, I guess, right? Because I suppose you could try to do it all and end up not doing anything.
Right. Yeah, and it's of course a challenge. I mean, we like to go, again, where the need is the greatest. And there's certain basic questions that we always want to know. Is the government stable? Is there a real commitment to education, for example? And is the cell phone infrastructure good enough? Although honestly, that's getting pretty good. But then we also sort of look for. I mean, one of the nice things about it's both a challenge and a blessing is people are beginning to understand the value of literacy and of education worldwide, and government leaders all the way down to community leaders are understanding it's the only way for their communities to sort of lift themselves up ultimately. So we like to be a bit demand driven. Where's the biggest pull for our services? I'll give you an example. We started about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now, a small pilot, because we sort of have the internet mentality. You start something small, you iterate around it, you figure out what works. The things that work, you pour more gasoline on that fire, right? And then the ones that don't, you kind of say, okay, that's going to be a certain thing, but it may not become big. Well, the work we did in Kenya, in libraries there, starting about 2 years ago, was working in 8 small libraries in Kenya. And we said, look, let's see if some of what we learned working in schools, putting Kindles in kids' hands, working with teachers, putting local books on those Kindles and so forth, let's see if that will work in a library context. We got a small grant from the Gates Foundation. We tested 8 libraries. We wanted to answer the following question. What will the effect be on the patrons? How many additional patrons will they get? And what will the effect be on the librarians? Will they get more engaged in their work? And the answer was a resounding yes on both. The librarians reported back to us, and we can get data, showing that the number of people they touched was well over 10,000. It was a factor of 10. There were literally tiny libraries that would stay closed on Saturdays in the past that now were overflowing with people with our program. There was a librarian named Kelvin, and Kelvin would literally, imagine this, he would put a backpack on, or satchel, with 25 of our e-readers, literally, and each one which had a couple of hundred books, so we're talking about the equivalent of 5,000 books. And he would literally walk around into the community on Saturdays and Sundays, and people would call him e-reader. E-reader. and in fact, he actually wrote a very nice piece on Mediums, and it's called "They Call Me E-reader." So once you see that says, okay, something's working there. So now let's pour some gasoline on it. So then we go out to the Stop Person Archives Foundation, we go back to the Gates Foundation, and they have now supported us to the tune of about $2.5 million in total to scale up to every library in Kenya. Every public library. There's 61 public libraries in Kenya, and we'll be there by the end of next year. That's a wonderful sort of example of, you kind of do some tests, you see where the community has some interest and all the rest, then you pour some gasoline, you scale it up, and now, of course, our goal is to sort of replicate it around. I'll say one last thing. I was in Tanzania a couple of years ago, and we launched one of our programs there at a school, 2 schools, near Arusha, Arusha. And the Prime Minister came. And it was a big deal, of course. And he came, there were 2,000 people at this launch ceremony, and we're telling the stories, and kind of, kids are up reading and so forth. And at the end of it, he looked at me and he said, you know what? We can afford an e-reader program, one of your WorldReader programs. What we cannot afford is another generation of illiterate and semi-literate children. And so that, again, is a very strong indication to us, okay, the small work at the time we're doing in Tanzania is going to find fertile ground. And so we kind of pour gasoline on it and kind of let it go.
Can I ask you a question?
I asked Neil about the Ebola thing too, actually.
I'm just curious.
Excuse us for a second.
Yeah. So David,
yeah, John.
I'm curious, in Kenya, the kids, what are they reading? Is it nonfiction, fiction? What are they like?
It's a great question, and I'll tell you just very, very briefly. One of the wonderful things about the digital world is you can answer that question first. Let's just sort of start with that, which is a big, big difference. Now we can know. So the younger kid, when we work in schools, we start with books that are relevant and appropriate to the local communities and local schools, and they help us choose that. I'll give you an example. One of the books that's the most popular book in our program is called Kofi Has Malaria. Kofi Has Malaria. This is a book by a Ghanaian publisher, EPP Publishing. They publish it both in English and in a local language, Ewe. The book is about a young boy wakes up in the morning, he's got a fever, doesn't know what to do, he goes to the doctor gives him a shot, he talks about mosquito nets, he talks about the importance of limiting standing water, he says you're gonna be okay, the boy's okay. And so we start with local storybooks in English and local language, and then we grow from there. So I'll give you one tiny more example. In our, what we call our mobile reading library, where you can read on your cell phone, we look at, for example, what Kenyan girls are particularly interested in. It turns out if you're a girl in Kenya, between the ages of 16 and 19, there's a book called Male Condom Instructions, or Reproductive Health Book, that you probably will have read if you're part of our program. So again, it's a bit of a feedback loop. It's a start with a thesis. We have now 40,000 books we've digitized. We work with schools and libraries to pick the best books, the most appropriate books for their context. And then we watch and we get more of what's working and the ones that aren't. Last thing, we say books start out as being mirrors, and then they become windows. So you have to start with books that remind you of yourself, where the context is local, where the language is local, where the relevance is high. And then over time you can sort of explore. We have many international books, Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, Magic Tree House series, international digital books that we've gotten the rights to that then kids start to read and adults read novels. Yeah.
We need, David is a stallion, man. You get him going, he will.